Welcome to Marketplace Mission. Join us as we explore how visionary leaders navigate challenges, discover purpose in profitability, and create environments where faith and business intersect. Marketplace Mission is your guide to unleashing the power of purpose in the workplace.
Well, hello and welcome back to Marketplace Mission. We've got an exciting episode for you today, for sure. Today, I'm excited to welcome David J. Maloney, one of the region's most renowned personal injury lawyers. With 300 to 500 cases a year, David Maloney and his firm pride themselves on being experienced legal allies when you're injured. With practices in auto accidents, slip and falls, big truck wrecks, product liabilities, storm claims, and more, they offer personal attention and provide help whenever they can. And I can personally vouch for you, David, that when I called David, he personally called me back, right?
I can't go, I probably end up with somewhere between 9,000 and 10,000 minutes a month on my cell phone.
Oh, wow.
And the thing about accidents is they don't happen at convenient times.
Oh, sure.
So as a result, you've got to be able to take calls at all times, including inconvenient times.
Well, I can vouch for you. You work all through the night, I think, or at least, from my email exchanges from the show and for everything back, like you responded back the other night at like 1:15 a.m. I didn't know if you just forgot and you woke up and you ran to your computer or you were actually still up, right?
I suffer from a lot of OCD, and as a result, I will continue working until my work is done, especially from an organizational standpoint.
Sure.
For example, I will update my calendar like every night at the end of the night. So after dinner, I will go back to the computer and do something. And then what I'll do is let's say my wife and I watch something, we watch a movie, or let's say we're watching a TV show that we intended on watching one of, but then ended up binge watching three of.
Right.
Then what I'll do is I'll check my emails before I go to bed.
Oh, wow.
So if it ends up being 12:30, 1 o'clock, and I have 3 emails, I might respond. Yours might have been the first one at 1:15. Chances are it was the second or third.
Wow. Well, I appreciate all the responses, personally and at the late night. And so we're happy to have you. So talking about the organizational side and your professional side, why don't you kind of just start us off a little bit about, why an attorney, and how did you know that you wanted to be an attorney?
So I had a commercial about this years ago, but when I was 13, for Mrs. Wesselman's English class, I had to read To Kill a Mockingbird. And I read it and I was like, it's what I want to do. And then, frankly, we also watched it. And then when I saw it, that reinforced it. Then it was either fall break or spring break with my father, because my parents were no longer together, and it was his visitation period. And I remember we were driving somewhere on the New York State Thruway. I want to say it was probably around like the Ramapo service area or something.
Right.
And I told him that that's what I want to do. And I was 13.
Oh, dang.
And he told me that that was what he had always wanted to do. But because I was born, it kind of derailed that.
Oh, wow.
And so then that further reinforced it. Then he had periodic dealings in his business where he had to deal with attorneys. And every time he had something when I was around, in other words, if I was visiting him, because he lived a good 3-4 hours from where my mom and my stepfather lived.
Right.
And whenever we would visit, and he had any kind of business dealings that involved an attorney, he would bring me to those meetings.
Oh, wow.
And I would get to meet these different lawyers who did franchising, lawyers who did general business law, all kinds of attorneys. And the more that I met and I was around them, I thought, yeah, this kind of fits me.
Well, that's interesting. So you kind of took on a dream your dad had. Was that your dad you were speaking of?
It was my biological father. And I didn't know it was a dream that he had when I developed my own interest in it. It was only until I was visiting him and I told him.
Oh, wow.
And then he said to me, that's what I always thought I'd be a good lawyer. That's what I always wanted to do. He did, he had been accepted to an Ivy League school, and then my mom got pregnant, and
right. Wow.
Here I am, and they ended up going in different paths and doing things that they were ultimately probably
Well,
whatever God had in store for them.
Well, I know there's multiple clients that are happy that your dad did what he did, even though, so I know there's a lot of happy clients that you have. So, other than your dad maybe and the inspirational pieces that came from that, and you kind of taking on getting around different attorneys and this kind of thing, what was it that inspired you the most about being a lawyer and the way you grew up, I guess, now? Separate parents, I guess you had. What were some of the things that really started to mold you into the lawyer that you've kind of become today?
Well, there's a number of different things there. My parents were separated, but I was raised by Doug Maloney, who adopted me. My stepfather adopted me. That's why my last name is Maloney. And he was the man who was at every ball game, went to every school play, helped me with homework. He was the man who was there for all of those things. I became closer with my biological father after I turned 18, and then I went to undergrad because he lived in Rochester, New York, and I went to undergrad up there. So as a result, they've both fit in different ways in my life at different times in exactly the ways that they were probably supposed to.
Interesting.
And they're very different people. So it gave me the ability to learn different aspects of life, different, and it helps me associate with a lot of different types of people too.
So then what would you accredit maybe your career kickoff to? You had these things you're dealing with, you decided a lawyer, you went down the normal road, I'm sure of it, and then, how did you flow into what was the kickoff for you?
Well, the interesting thing is partway through high school, I realized that I had a knack for art and photography. And
we can hire him.
Yeah. Well, I had a knack for art and photography. So I actually got into RIT as a photo major with a photo portfolio. I then switched over to graphic design and marketing. Now that dovetails into more of what I do now, because when you do personal injury work, one of the hardest things is making your phone ring, especially in a market where you have a lot of attorneys advertising.
Right.
I was one of the first. There was Morris Bart had done it for a little bit, and then he left.
Right.
And then I kind of came in slightly under the radar with a more subtle form of marketing, largely based on the fact that at that time, lawyers who advertised was very frowned upon in this conservative area.
So that's why maybe you started with the advertisements. Tell us about your first one. It was just the black screen, right? Kind of put you on the map without having to be on the map.
Well, the first ads that I did was and if you remember, at that time we didn't have YouTube, we didn't have streaming, everybody had cable. You didn't even have Dish TV or any of those things. Everybody had cable. And if your screen suddenly went black, no matter what you were doing, you were like, oh no, my cable just went out. That was how everybody thought. My cable just went out. And you'd glue yourself to the screen, and you'd wait to see if it came back in a few minutes or whether or not you were going to have to call the cable company, right?
Yeah.
And so the idea that I had was to do a silent commercial where the screen would go to black and then words would come up on the screen. And from the graphic design standpoint, I thought, I'll just use Times New Roman, something nice and basic. Right. And I had 3 different ads, but the main one said, it would come up, it would say, "You're home again watching television." And then you'd be glued. That was the end. That was the hook. And then it would say, "Because you were injured." And then it would say, "It wasn't your fault."
Oh, wow.
And then it would come up and say, "You may be unable to work. Bills may be piling up.
Right.
You're in pain." Then an insurance company adds insult to your injuries.
Oh, wow.
Who do you call? Then my logo would come up. And then the line, "I will personally return your call."
So you basically stole your original marketing campaign from the old system DOS, right? Do you remember DOS? The system DOS, where you had to type everything into it. It's like the old Tron system where it said end of line.
Yeah, right? Oh, yeah. Do you want to play a game?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So you basically stole your whole marketing campaign in the beginning from DOS and from the center of Tron, right?
Well, I had the idea I came up with, I knew I wanted to do "I'll personally return your call" because that was the biggest complaint people had with lawyers. So if I could quell the biggest complaint people had in one ad, the biggest complaint is I can't get the guy to return my call.
Wow.
Still to this day, if somebody calls me and they say, I just terminated my lawyer and I want to hire you, I'll be, well, what happened with the lawyer? And they'll be like, I couldn't get the guy to return my call. You know what I mean? So, it's still a common problem today.
So as you began to progress through your advertising and things, because we've all watched it, I'm from here, so I've seen your commercials over the years for myself, and so always entertaining, right? Always this, I wonder what's going to happen now, I wonder what he's going to do this time. So you've always kind of got this bar you've kind of set for yourself that now, it's kind of like buying that good present for your wife, and then you got to keep buying a better present, and that's kind of how your advertising is done for yourself, right?
Well, there's different types of advertising. You have what's called call to action advertising. That's what most attorneys run. Call me right now. Okay, that is the in your face. I've tried to avoid doing that. Okay, I got him this much money. Call me right now. Right. And I try to avoid that type of marketing. But then my marketing is more based on branding. And there's two ways of going about branding. There's multiple ways, but the two ways I go about it most are informational, educational. In other words, this is what you should expect from an attorney, or these are things that you should know if you're in a wreck, okay?
Right.
Educational things that provide a public kind of benefit, but at the same point in time, remind people of your name, remind them that you know what you're doing, and that you know what you're talking about. And and hopefully help them feel like, okay, this guy knows what he's doing. I trust him. I like him. I want to call him.
Right.
Okay? The other one is branding. Branding is a completely different beast.
Sure.
And the thing about branding is there's certain elements that go into making things memorable. The rule used to be way back, like in the 80s, if they saw it 3 times, they'd call you. Well, then it became like 7. Now it's got to be like 14 because people are bombarded, right? So you've got to have something that makes it kind of memorable. And then there's different niches. You have to figure out what niche you're going to fulfill in your branding. Okay, we've got like I said, I think we have 14 different attorneys that advertise in this market right now. And different attorneys have different niches that they fill. They have a different thing that they're promoting that, whether, it be that, one guy, wins, or right. Or the other one is the biggest
guys, or we're the motorcycle guys,
or,
right?
And everybody has their little niche. My niche is kind of what you said is, right. Is that people kind of know me as that guy.
Sure.
And so, and what I get is I don't get the people who are like, I just saw your ad on TV and I'm calling you, and I called you. I've been seeing your ads for years, and I always said that if something ever bad happened to be, God forbid, I'd call you.
Well, I think you've got a good mix over the years of, you've gone from kind of quirky commercials for branding to kind of show the lighter side of yourself to serious portions of, hey, this is how we handle our business, all the way to family qualities of this is when I'm eating with my family, and you're showing the time frames and all that. So I like the mix that you've been able to present over the years, showing that, hey, we're not all just one thing. We do have human capabilities. We do have character. We do have families. We do have these other things. And I think that's played in your advantage over the years for the things that you've done.
Well, the family commercial, the one you're referring to, was actually my. It was kind of my wife's idea. What happened was we were sitting at that exact island, right, having dinner, and my wife said something along the lines where I was talking about the number of different attorneys that were advertising and how competitive it's kind of gotten. And to be honest, I don't like I got them this much money type of ads, because I feel they're misleading. And the reason why I think they're misleading is because you may have an ad, there may be a billboard up that says that they got somebody $12 million. But what that billboard doesn't say is maybe that case was worth 18.
Right.
You know what I mean? It doesn't say that, or that maybe there was $12 million in a jury verdict, but maybe $8 million of that was actually for a different plaintiff with another firm that was in the same case. Sure. So there's things that people don't know when they see those big numbers. Also, it creates unreasonable expectations. And so I try to avoid those ads at all costs. I might, if we get a big settlement, might say, hey, do a digital thing that says this, but I'll put an explanation in as to what it was so people know. But but that one ad, what happened was I was talking to my wife about these, and she said, if people only knew how hard you work behind the scenes.
Sure.
And I went, I can show them that.
Right.
And so what I did was I called my production folks and I said, look, I have this idea. I want you to follow me around for a whole day.
Oh, wow.
We're going to start in the morning. You're going to show up
Bless their
as
heart.
I'm getting out of the shower. And you're going to set the lights up, and you're going to get me putting on my tie, and you're going to get me, starting my work in the morning, calling insurance companies. If if it's a day I had something in court, you're going to follow me to the courthouse. You're going to follow me around. When I meet with clients, if the clients will sign something saying they're willing to be on TV, we'll get me meeting with clients. And that's what we did. And it's funny, we have people who go, oh, well, it says, 8:47 p.m. That's too late for you to be having dinner or whatever.
Right.
I'm gonna make it even worse.
Sure.
We had to digitally change that. That was actually 9:47.
Well,
we actually had to digitally change that. That's what time we were really having dinner, was 9:47. And that's one of the reasons why. If I'm eating dinner at 9:47, I'm finishing dinner at 10:30, 11. I'm getting in the shower, and then I watch something for a half hour. I check my emails. You get an email at 1:15 in the morning.
That's right.
And then the next day, I'm up at 7-something calling adjusters on the East Coast.
Well, let's go back to a little bit of what you just said a few minutes ago about the size of these settlements, because, like you said, the majority of the advertisements we see are about the size of the settlements, right? I mean, we'll see these huge settlements. I guess maybe from a human perspective, just overall, how do you kind of begin to take in, or how did you kind of absorb the fact that you just won this huge settlement maybe the first time? Maybe it's a $10 million settlement and you're like, oh my Lord, I just won $10 million. How do you get your mind around that? How do you get your mind around that for the client? And what was the wrestling match maybe for you in the beginning of having to deal with these large sums of money in the beginning, when I assume you probably weren't used to dealing with these large sums of money? What's the transition like when you're dealing with that kind of money?
So, I told you before that my two fathers had two very distinctly different lifestyles. When I grew up, my mom and my stepfather, we didn't have a lot of money. I grew up food stamps poor, okay? I lived in Woodstock. There was a lot of people from the city, a lot of families from the city who sent who went up because we had the best public school in the state in that area. And so I went to school with a lot of celebrities' kids. My biological father was doing very well financially, but my mom was too proud to take a dime. Mm-hmm. So I lived two distinctly different lifestyles based on where I was. Mm-hmm. I was the poor kid here, and then I would go visit him for a weekend or whatever, and it would be a totally different lifestyle. So I know one, how to, handle myself around folks of all different types of lifestyles, because I've been there. I know my roots. My roots are poor, but I also know how to be around, be around money.
Right. Yeah.
And so and I had already had a prior business before that I started to pay my way through law school that did well. Gotcha. And so I had already had success once. Then the internet took the legs out from under that business. And that's when I started getting, taking everything I learned from marketing, that business, law, and all that stuff, and put it all together to make this firm. And when I first there was a period of struggle. Whenever you're building anything new and you're starting from the ground up and you're kind of new in town and you don't, right. I mean, there was lots of nights where I was living off iceberg lettuce and Kraft macaroni and cheese.
We wouldn't know anything about that here at the studio, being new, and we wouldn't know anything about that. Yeah.
Yeah, and so, I mean, there was a lot of Kraft macaroni and cheese back in the day, but when I first got probably the first big settlement I got, which would have been the first big fee I got, I paid off a bunch of debt. My wife and I had been married, my wife, we needed to do IVF.
Oh. Okay.
And frankly, it paid for 7 different IVFs. The first one worked, but we miscarried. And then we had 2 others didn't work. Then we had one that we had to stop in the middle of because a hurricane came. But the 7th time we did it, it worked. And it's not an inexpensive endeavor. And my son is a product of IVF.
I'll be darned. Well, you landed on the number we love, right? We're 7 studios. So, we do believe that 7 is
the lucky number?
The number of completion.
There you have it.
So there you go. At number 7, you got completed in what you were after.
There, it makes sense. And my son is a biblical studies major.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So he's going to learn it for himself then.
He may have already learned it.
So what do you think, other than the advertisement differences, and hearing some of your personal stories, just been honestly refreshing for myself, because we all build up these branding things in our minds, right? I mean, people think what they think about me based on what they've seen or heard. They do it the same to you. But when you start talking about, my wife and I went through IVF, I was dealing with a divorce situation with my mom and dad. I was back and forth. My son's in biblical studies. These are things that we don't actually get to understand, even when you're our lawyer maybe, or, even when we see you on advertisement. And this is what I love about this particular show. The show is not actually trying to help you get more clients. I don't think you actually need any help in that. I think what the show's all about is what's your story and how did you get there and what's your mission now? And so, maybe you could explain that to us now as, what's your mission now that you're in this position you're in? You've got the kind of clout that you have, if you want to use that word for it, and you've basically can, influence others. You're in an influence situation now. So how are you using that influence now, maybe with your kids, maybe with other lawyers, with people coming up? What's the mission statement now for you in this position that you're in now?
Well, there's a lot to unravel in that. Okay.
Right.
Well, the first thing I'll say is this: our number one aim and goal. You'd think, personal injury firm, money, 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 right? You'd think the first goal would be make a bunch of money, make a bunch of money, make a bunch of money. My approach has always been the same, which is the number one aim and goal is not to make money. The number one aim and goal is to help people. If your number one aim and goal is not to help people, then you're not entitled to the second goal, which is making the money. Okay. Right. So, but you've got to, your interest has got to be genuine and pure in that regard. You have to be genuinely, your goal is to help people. Okay. And if you do it and you do it right, then the rest should come naturally. And so that's part of it. The other part of it is, I said my son's a biblical studies major.
Right.
And he's going to school for it now, and he's a freshman in college. And he said to me, not just the other day, but we spoke earlier today because he was writing a paper in which he had to write how he thinks his major is going to help him in whatever job he ends up with later. Now, he's a musician, so he could go into Christian music.
Right.
My father-in-law is a pastor. He's responsible largely for a good part of the spread of Christianity in Northeast India. He is semi-retired only because he's like 99 or 100 years old, and he's still doing what he does because he's like the Energizer. You can't stop the guy.
He's more energized than you.
He's kind of like he's Asian, so he's kind of like a combination between Billy Graham and Mr. Miyagi. You know what I mean?
Wax on, wax off.
Yeah. So but the thing is, he doesn't say much, but whatever he does say is remarkably important.
Sure.
And he's a man of few words, but those words are always important words. And so I could see him following in his footsteps, but then he said to me today, when he was talking about it, he goes, well, I could go into Christian music. He goes, I could become a professor. I could become a pastor. He said, or he goes, I could even go into law.
Right.
And he mentioned it once or twice, but not as seriously as he did today.
Sure.
And so, and whether that be, representing churches or Christian groups or whatever, maybe in constitutional issues, or whether that be him doing something with my firm. Personally, I think he'd be a great mediator because he's good at, looking at both sides of things and helping people kind of bridge their gaps.
Right.
Maybe it might be leaving some sort of legacy for my kid. To answer your question,
Well,
maybe that might be the ultimate mission, which is to build a practice and give him something at some point to take over, if that's his leaning. If it's not his leaning, I want him just to be, like any parent. I just want to be happy doing whatever he's doing. And if one of the things, I like what I'm doing. I love what I'm doing, but I can't force him to love what I'm doing.
Right. So how did it pull on your dad's strings, though? Just total emotional strings whenever he says, well, I might want to do law. I'm sure that didn't hurt your feelings at all, right? Or did you think, I don't know if I want him to have that same road?
Somebody asked him when he was like 9 if you want to do the same thing that your dad does. And his response was no, and they said, why not? He said, because I'd want to spend more time with my family. I was like, boom,
no.
Punch in the gut.
Oh,
it was a brutal punch in the gut. But because of what I do, and because of now the way that I can do it, and the way technology has changed now, I can do a lot of what I do from anywhere. Sure. I can work more from home than I used to.
Sometimes those extra hours, we get to exchange sometimes for a higher quality thing that we wouldn't have been able to do without that time. There's always the trade-offs, and there's always going to be people out there fighting us one way or the other about the trade-off, right?
Well, when you look at, there are a lot of people who make similar or greater sacrifices.
Right.
If you look at people in the medical community, especially during COVID, the things they had to do to provide for their families or give the families the lifestyle that they felt they deserved. Our servicemen and women, the sacrifices they make, they don't get to see, you don't get to see your father or mother for extended periods of time if they're deployed.
Sure.
There's a lot of people who make, frankly, even greater sacrifices.
No doubt.
You know what I mean? And I respect that because they're doing what they have to do for their family.
I will say this, though. I think your son's a great case study, and why I've kind of started this show overall would be that I went to a Bible college in my 40s. I went to Mobile College here in town. I got a degree in marketplace ministry because marketplace ministry was interesting to me because I'd never heard of it before. And I thought, either to be in full-time ministry, I thought you had to work for a church or sing Christian music or all the things that you're talking about. But then I started to realize that, no, it's not like that at all. We basically take our gifts and talents, whatever those may be, yours being an attorney and the things that you do, and you can have just as much influence in that atmosphere with your gifts and talents. You can be in full-time ministry yourself. You actually are. Because you say you like to start everything with love. So if you actually like to start everything with love and caring about people, then you're in a ministry. Because a ministry loves and cares about people, that's what they do. They don't make money off the backs of people. We call that manipulation. So there's businesses that are manipulating people, acting as if I love you so that I can make money on you. And then there's companies that are actually love you, and then if they get the fruits from loving you, then that's okay too. So this is why I wanted to have you here. This is why I'm doing this type of show, is because I'm wanting people to understand that you can be a minister in your marketplace, doing whatever it is you want to do. You just need to focus on what your gifts and talents are that the Lord gave you, and then move into that, and He'll make you a minister in any of those fields.
I'm a firm believer that when it comes to faith, that I don't think a lot of people are swayed to suddenly come to faith because somebody's on a street corner holding up a sign, screaming and yelling with a Bible in one hand. Right. I don't think that, from the marketing guy in me says, that's not going to sway any opinion. Now, what will sway opinion? Living a life by example. What will sway opinion? Being happy and content in who you are and at peace. Why? Because you've found your faith. And then people come to you and they go, how are you like this? Why are you always so, at peace or well-adjusted, or why are you okay in this situation? And then they see it's because of your faith, and then they go, I want that too. and then they ask you, and then you get to share with them, and then you get to, for lack of a better way of putting it, testify, or whatever the proper term is for that. And that goes to what you're saying, which is, and my wife was more instrumental with me in that sense, because she didn't, I grew up Catholic.
Right.
And then frankly, and I was an altar boy till I was like 18.
Right.
Okay. And because we had a shortage of altar boys, and I felt obligated. And because as people got older, kids find other things to do, even in the 80s.
Sure.
Okay. And so, but then when a lot of the stuff came out, about, unfortunately, I wasn't caught up in any of that as an altar
Right.
boy, but a lot of people were, not in my church, but in other places.
Sure.
And when that came out, I was like, that made me really disillusioned with the Catholic Church. Well, soon after, within a year or two, I met my wife, and she's a pastor's daughter. Like I said, her father is
Right.
responsible for the spread of Christianity over a large portion of Northeast India, where people are Hindu, Buddhist, or Muslim.
Right.
And it was her living life by example that had me gravitate, more towards, Christianity, more non-denominational Christianity,
Sure.
rather than Roman Catholicism. But it was, and I think that's the way most people, I think, are not only would come to faith, but I think their faith would be stronger if they came to it in that way.
Listen, you just told a powerful story all in itself that I've been trying to tell from this platform. So, beautiful. I mean, what you're talking about is basically a virtuous woman leads by example. And, apparently, the wife that you're describing is what we call a Proverbs 33 type of wife. And so, I think I can see now also that I shouldn't give you all the credit when it comes to your success, because it seems as if your wife has kept you on the right track. Very, very, very much so. And now your son seems to, what I like is I don't think it's only you that's noticing the way that your wife lives and the way she handles herself. I think it's why your son's doing what your son's doing. I think your son's also appreciated probably the things that he's seen in mom. And I think he's also probably seen the changes that mom has influenced dad in. And maybe now, this is just for me and for fun, maybe now what's happening is I didn't like the type of lawyer look that I thought dad had to be early. But this new dad I'm watching, as he begins to kind of mix faith in with his practice, this is something that I could see myself now wanting to be in law for.
Well, my law partner, Randy Lyons, is one of the best human beings I know, and he is remarkably devout. And he has his own interesting story in that he was already a man of faith, and then he was diagnosed with cancer. Mm-hmm. And they caught it early, but it was a cancer that not many people survive. Mm. And he went through all the normal regimens and the chemo and everything else. Right. And but his faith was key during that period of time. And he ended up in remission. Here he is 8, 9, 10 years later, still in remission. Randy is, Randy prays before a meal he'll have in a restaurant. And he's one of the best people I know. And so that kind of goes to a little bit of what you're saying with my son, in that he saw, first of all, Randy is a person who, in a dog-eat-dog legal profession, where there are, to be honest, a lot of unscrupulous people, okay?
Right.
He could see that a man of faith could thrive still in that otherwise toxic environment.
Yes, very
okay?
much. Right.
And my son is the appropriate product of my wife and I. He knows how to take the best qualities of each, and he rarely will pull one of the bad qualities out of the hat.
Right.
In other words, he knows they're there. He's seen, right. Neither of us are perfect. Sure. So he knows our flaws, and he can adopt the flaws. Right. But instead, the vast majority of the time he adopts he adopts what he considers to be the better qualities, and that's what he tries to employ. So yeah, I think he's seeing, with especially with Randy being so devout, that he can be,
Right.
you know, he could wear all those hats.
Well, this story's been wonderful. Thank you so much for coming.
No, I appreciate it.
I mean, these stories about your son are amazing. You know, I'm hoping that I can hear more about that in the future, and I can have some influence on him and even talk to him about the difference between success and reach. Because we're actually taught as kids that we should have huge success, when in the faith business we're taught that we should just have larger reach. And we can actually reach more people when we love them and we treat them the way that we're taught this way. And so when we try to move a business in towards success and money, it tends to either have a very strong growth curve that has a very strong crash curve, or it has a slow growth curve that never goes anywhere. But I have noticed that when you're looking for reach and you're treating people the way you should, the reach that the Lord trusts you with just grows. And then so does the gifts and the talents. So I'm thankful for all the things that you said. And so as an advocate for the helpless, we all must stand boldly on the many mountains of influence. The mountain of government, where evil is either restrained or endorsed. The mountain of education, where truths or lies about our history and our futures are taught. The mountain of media, where information is interpreted through the lens of good or evil. The mountains of arts and entertainment, where values and virtues are celebrated or distorted. The mountain of religion, where people worship in spirit and truth or settle for a religious ritual. The mountain of family, where either the blessing or a curse is passed on to successive generations. Finally, the one mountain that we focus on here is the mountain of business, where resources are consecrated either for light or end up manipulated for the powers of darkness. All of these mountains shape our culture, and those who lead them determine their influence. Let us rise with purpose, using our individual gates of influence for truth to defend the helpless and transform generations to come, just like we hear from David J. Maloney. Thank you, David. We appreciate the time here.
I appreciate it. Thank
Yes,
you
sir.
for having me.
Thank you everyone for tuning in to Marketplace Mission. Don't forget to follow us on social media and leave us a review. Until next time, unleash power in your workplace.